If this doesn't disturb you, nothing will. Daniel Voss had learned long ago that dogs did not stare at empty places for no reason. That was why, when his German Shepherd, Ranger, stopped halfway down the upstairs hallway and locked his eyes on the dark attic stairs, Daniel didn't call it imagination. He called it a warning. The old house had been his father's. A narrow, weather-beaten place standing alone at the end of a dead gravel road, wrapped in dying maple trees and years of silence. Daniel had moved in 3 weeks earlier because silence was supposed to help a man like him. Silence was supposed to calm the noise left behind by war. It hadn't. Some nights he still woke up reaching for a rifle that was no longer there. Some nights he heard rotor blades and rain. Some nights he heard Mason. Especially Mason. Mason had been the man Daniel failed to bring home. Ranger gave a low, vibrating growl. Daniel stood in the hallway with a mug of cold coffee in one hand and followed the dog's stare to the attic stairs. They were old pull-down stairs set into the ceiling above the far end of the hall. Folded up now. Shut tight. Black seam around the hatch. Nothing unusual. But Ranger would not blink. The dog's ears were stiff. Tail lowered. Weight forward. Not fear. Focus. "What is it?" Daniel asked quietly. Ranger didn't look at him. A soft tick came from above. Daniel froze. The sound was small, but it landed inside him like a trigger being pulled. His body changed before his thoughts did. Shoulders tight. Breath shorter. Eyes narrowing. In another life, that reaction had kept men alive. In this house, it just made the dark feel closer. Wind scraped along the siding outside. Somewhere downstairs the old refrigerator hummed. Then everything went still again. Ranger took one slow step toward the attic. Daniel set the coffee mug down on the floor. "No games," he whispered, mostly to himself. The dog suddenly whined once, deep in his throat, and that sound unsettled Daniel more than a bark would have. Ranger didn't whine because of mice in the walls or branches on the roof. Ranger had once found an insurgent hiding under torn metal before a whole patrol walked into an ambush. He had once dragged Daniel behind a stone barrier half a second before sniper fire cracked across the road. The dog did not invent danger. Another sound came from above. Not a tick this time. A slow creak. Like weight shifting. Daniel looked up at the folded stairs and felt the skin on the back of his neck tighten. The attic had been locked since he moved in. He had checked it once from below, seen only dust and old boxes, then left it alone. His father had never liked anyone going up there. As a child, Daniel remembered that clearly. If you asked about the attic, his father changed the subject. If you touched the cord, his father's voice became something sharp and final. Ranger moved closer, now standing directly under the hatch. Daniel crossed into the bedroom, opened the top drawer of the nightstand, and took out the flashlight and the pistol he hated keeping near him. He checked the magazine by instinct, chambered nothing, then came back into the hallway. Ranger had not moved an inch. "Stay with me," Daniel said. He reached for the hanging cord and hesitated. A smell drifted down from the seam around the hatch. Smoke. Not fresh smoke. Old smoke. Burned wood. Burned cloth. Daniel's hand stopped in midair. For one terrible second the hallway vanished, and he was back inside a ruined structure overseas, kneeling in heat and black air, hearing Mason pounding from behind a collapsed beam while flames climbed the walls faster than they should have. Daniel had shouted that he was coming. He had meant it. But the ceiling came down first. Ranger pressed against his leg. That brought him back. Daniel grabbed the cord and yanked hard. The attic hatch snapped open. The folding stairs dropped down with a violent wooden crack, and a wave of stale, freezing air poured over them. Dust floated into the hallway. Ranger barked once, sharp and explosive. Daniel clicked on the flashlight and aimed it upward. The beam cut through hanging dust, rough rafters, stacked trunks, old blankets, broken chairs. Nothing moved. Nothing human. Just junk and darkness. Then the beam reached the far side of the attic floor. Scrape marks. Fresh ones. Long pale lines carved through years of dust, as if something heavy had been dragged across the boards not long ago. Daniel felt his pulse harden. He climbed. Each step groaned under his boots. Ranger stayed so close behind him Daniel could hear the dog breathing. The higher they went, the colder the air became. By the time Daniel stepped off the folding stairs onto the attic floor, the house below felt impossibly far away. Rain began outside, tapping the roof softly at first. Daniel swept the beam left to right. An old rocking horse without one eye. Cedar trunks. Framed photos face down. A military footlocker in the corner. Torn curtains hanging from nails. Dust everywhere except near the scrape marks. Ranger pulled ahead suddenly and stopped near the middle of the attic. He lowered his nose to the floorboards. Then he pawed once. Thunk. Hollow. Daniel crouched beside him and aimed the flashlight down. One section of boards was slightly newer than the rest. Not new, but replaced. Different nails. Poor fit. Someone had opened this spot once and sealed it back in a hurry. Ranger's growl deepened. Daniel set the flashlight down sideways so the beam washed across the floor, found an old pry bar behind a trunk, and jammed it into the seam. The wood resisted. He pushed harder. Crack. One board lifted. At the exact same moment, something slammed in the far corner of the attic. Daniel whipped around, pistol rising, beam shaking across the rafters. Nothing. Only an old coat hanging from a beam, moving slightly. Ranger exploded into barking. Then Daniel saw it. Beyond the swinging coat, at the deepest edge of the attic, stood what looked like a man. Tall. Motionless. Head tilted slightly. Darker than the dark around it. Daniel's breath caught. The figure did not move. Rain hit the roof harder now. Ranger barked again and stepped in front of Daniel, body rigid, teeth showing. Daniel forced the beam steady. The light hit the figure full on. And the man disappeared. It wasn't a man. It was a dressmaker's stand draped in one of his father's old overcoats. Daniel let out one breath, angry at himself, but the relief did not last. Ranger was still not looking at the stand. He was looking at the opening under the floorboard. A faint electronic chirp came from inside. Daniel went still. Beep. A pause. Beep. A cold wave moved through him. He knew that rhythm. Military distress beacon. His hands suddenly felt numb. No, he whispered. He tore the loosened board back farther and aimed the flashlight into the compartment beneath the floor. A metal box sat hidden there under a layer of dust and mouse droppings. On top of the box, blinking weakly red through the grime, was an old emergency locator beacon from Daniel's unit. Not similar. The same model. The same scratched casing. The same strip of black tape around one side. Daniel stared as the years folded inward on themselves. Mason had carried a beacon exactly like that on the mission where he died. Ranger stopped barking and pressed hard against Daniel's side, trembling now. With a shaking hand, Daniel reached down and lifted the beacon out. Cold. Too cold. Under it was a photograph. Daniel unfolded it carefully. It was an old team picture from deployment. Daniel, Mason, and the rest of the squad standing in desert light, exhausted and grinning after a mission none of them should have survived. But someone had scratched every face out except Daniel's. His stomach dropped. A thud came from below. Both Daniel and Ranger turned toward the attic stairs. Another thud. Heavy. Slow. Coming from the hallway beneath them. Like boots on old wood. Daniel killed the flashlight instantly. Darkness swallowed the attic. Rain hammered the roof. Ranger's breathing became rough and low. Daniel crouched beside the hidden compartment, every muscle locked, pistol aimed toward the opening. The footsteps below climbed closer and stopped directly under the attic hatch. Silence. Not normal silence. Listening silence. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat. Could feel Ranger vibrating beside him. Could smell dust, old smoke, wet wood. Then, from directly below the attic stairs, a voice rose through the dark. Broken. Hoarse. Familiar enough to freeze Daniel's blood. You left me there. Daniel's fingers tightened on the pistol so hard they hurt. Because that voice did not belong to a stranger. It belonged to Mason. And Mason had been dead for 9 years. Daniel could not move. The attic had gone so still that even the rain on the roof sounded far away. Ranger stood beside him rigid, every muscle drawn tight, lips peeled back just enough to show his teeth. The dog's growl vibrated through the floorboards and into Daniel's boots. Below the attic hatch, no one spoke again. No footsteps. No breath. Nothing. But Daniel knew what he had heard. Not a memory. Not a dream. It had been Mason's voice. You left me there. Daniel forced air into his lungs. One breath. Then another. Old training came back automatically. Check angles. Secure height. Control light. Confirm exits. Assess threat. Do not let fear choose the next move. Ranger suddenly gave a sharp bark toward the attic opening. Daniel snapped the flashlight beam toward the stairs. Empty. The hallway below looked harmless in the weak spill of light rising from downstairs. The runner rug lay flat. The wallpaper opposite the stairs was still. The front bedroom door remained half open exactly as he had left it. Nothing human. Nothing moving. And yet the dog kept staring. Daniel stepped carefully toward the opening, crouched at the top of the folding stairs, and listened. The house breathed around him. Pipes. Wind. Rain. The old moan of timber under weather. Then, somewhere below and to the left, something clicked. Metal on wood. Daniel turned the beam toward the staircase railing downstairs, but from this angle he could only see part of the landing. Ranger whined once, then shoved his nose hard against Daniel's side, urging him back. Daniel obeyed. That alone told him how bad this felt. Ranger had never pulled him away unless moving forward was the wrong call. Daniel retreated from the opening and knelt again beside the hidden compartment. The red beacon still blinked from the floor where he had set it down. Beep. Pause. Beep. The same impossible proof that something buried in the past had found its way into this house. Daniel's flashlight swept the compartment again. The metal box sat open. The scratched photo lay near his knee, every face carved out except his own. Ranger lowered his head and sniffed the inside edge of the compartment, then backed away with a soft growl. Daniel followed the movement of the dog's nose and noticed, for the first time, that the wood beneath the box was darker than the surrounding boards. Not stained. Burned. Scorch marks. Old ones. He lifted the box fully out of the opening. The hidden space extended farther back than he first thought. There was another object beyond where the box had been resting. A cloth bundle. Daniel reached in and pulled it out. Oilskin, stiff with age. He unwrapped it. A combat knife dropped into his palm. For a second his mind refused to process what he was seeing. Then the details snapped into focus one by one. The nick in the handle. The worn finger groove. The darkened steel from years of use. And at the base of the grip, carved roughly with the tip of another blade, 2 letters. M.K. Mason Kane. Daniel stared so hard his eyes watered. The knife had belonged to Mason since their second deployment. Mason sharpened it while talking too much, used it as a screwdriver, a pry bar, and once, stupidly, as a roasting skewer over a fire. Daniel had threatened to throw it in a river more than once. Daniel's thumb moved over the initials. Cold steel. Real weight. Real edges. This was no hallucination. Who had put this here? And why hide it in the attic of his father's house? Ranger swung back toward the attic opening and barked again, louder this time. Daniel rose fast, the knife still in one hand, the pistol in the other. The hallway below remained empty. But now the ceiling light over the downstairs staircase was off. Daniel knew it had been on. Something had changed while his back was turned. He moved 2 steps toward the opening, then stopped when Ranger cut across in front of him and blocked the way. The shepherd's ears were angled not downward toward the hall, but sideways, toward the far end of the attic. Daniel turned slowly. The flashlight beam slid over hanging blankets, stacked trunks, old fishing rods, a broken rocking chair, and finally the far corner near the chimney where the roof dipped lowest. Dust moved there. Not falling. Drifting sideways. As if something had just passed through it. Daniel brought the pistol up. "Who's there?" No answer came. Then, from somewhere deep in the house, a floorboard groaned. A deliberate step. Ranger barked, then looked back at Daniel again, torn between 2 threats. Daniel knelt beside the metal box and dug through its contents with desperate speed. Under the first layer of papers lay a folded map, yellow with age and soft at the creases. Beneath that was a packet of letters tied with faded green cord. His name was written on the top one. Just Daniel. Not Sergeant. Not Voss. Daniel. The handwriting hit him like a fist. Mason's. Messy, slanted, impatient Mason writing. Daniel untied the cord and unfolded the first page. Daniel, if this reaches you, then somebody finally made you look where they never wanted you to look. His heartbeat turned heavy. He kept reading. If you're holding this, then whatever story they gave you about that night was a lie. Daniel's throat closed. I didn't die where they said I died. The flashlight trembled in his grip. I was alive when they pulled you out. Hurt bad, but alive. I know because I heard them arguing after. I heard one of them say I wasn't supposed to make it past the fire. Daniel stopped. The official report said the structure collapsed, secondary ignition spread too fast, visibility went to 0, and Mason was presumed killed before extraction could reach him. But this suggested something far worse than failure. It suggested intent. Daniel swallowed and read on. We were sold. Route, timing, entry point. Somebody fed them everything. Daniel's eyes jumped to the next line. I saw your father the day before. He met a man by the orchard road outside town. Didn't know I was there. Didn't know I heard enough to know something was wrong. The attic seemed to tilt. No. Daniel read the line again. Your father. His father had never spoken much after Daniel came home. Only watched. Only drank. Only said strange things that sounded wise, until you remembered them later and realized they sounded guilty. Some things are buried for a reason. You don't go opening what the dead already settled. Daniel had taken those as bitter old man sayings from someone who didn't know how to comfort a broken son. Now they sounded like warnings. Ranger spun with a violent snarl toward the corner near the chimney. Something shifted there. A trunk lid tapped once against wood. Daniel swung the flashlight. For half a second he saw movement. A shoulder maybe. Or the edge of a coat pulling out of sight. He lunged forward 3 steps, pistol trained on the gap between 2 stacks of boxes. Come out! Nothing. Dust drifted. Then a scratching noise came from inside the wall behind him. Daniel turned so fast his knees slammed the trunk. Ranger was already there, barking at a narrow section of warped paneling beside an old shelf. The wood looked wrong in the beam. 2 planks newer than the rest. Nails cleaner. Someone had opened this part too. The attic suddenly felt less like storage and more like a place built to hide a history. Daniel shoved aside a crate, found the pry bar, and rammed it into the seam. Crack. The board split and tore loose. Behind it was a shallow cavity between the studs. Inside sat a tape recorder, 3 military dog tags looped together with black cord, and a framed photograph turned face down. Daniel grabbed the tags first. The metal clinked softly. One belonged to Mason Kane. One belonged to Daniel Voss. And the third belonged to Lieutenant Aaron Pike, the intelligence officer who handled route confirmations on the mission where everything went wrong. Pike had testified at the inquiry. Pike had signed off on the official report. Pike had been the one who told Daniel, "There was nothing anyone could have done." Ranger let out another deep growl. Daniel set the tags down and turned over the photograph. His hand nearly failed him. It was Mason. Alive. Older. Thinner. Beard grown out. One scar running from temple to jaw that had not existed before the fire. He was standing near the orchard behind this very house, half turned toward the camera. Stamped in yellow digits at the bottom corner was a date. 6 months ago. Daniel stared until the numbers blurred. 6 months. Not 9 years. 6 months ago, Mason had been standing on this property. Ranger backed away from the photo and looked toward the attic stairs again. Then the voice came a second time. Closer now. Not from below. From the dark end of the attic behind Daniel. "You should have kept reading." Daniel spun. The flashlight beam caught a man standing between the trunks. Tall. Thin. Burn scarred across one side of his face. And holding Daniel's father's old shotgun pointed straight at his chest. Daniel did not blink. The flashlight beam stayed fixed on the man between the trunks, and the man stayed fixed in the light like something dragged up out of a grave. One side of his face was a map of old burns, tight skin, twisted pale ridges, one eyebrow gone. His beard was streaked with gray. He was thinner than Daniel remembered, but the eyes were the same. Mason's eyes. The old shotgun in his hands never wavered. Ranger's growl changed. A second ago, it had been the deep warning he reserved for threats. Now it dipped lower, rougher, confused. The German shepherd stood between Daniel and the muzzle, hackles up, but he wasn't lunging. He was smelling. Testing. Trying to place something buried under years, smoke, and blood memory. Daniel's mouth went dry. "That's not possible." The scarred man answered without moving the gun. "Funny. I said the same thing when I heard you were living in this house." The voice hit Daniel harder than the sight had. It was worn raw, but it was Mason's voice. Daniel's finger tightened near the trigger of his pistol. "Take the gun down. You first. You were dead. That was the idea." Rain hammered the roof. Somewhere downstairs a door tapped once in the wind, then again, slower. Ranger swung his head toward the attic stairs, then back to Mason. Daniel took one step sideways. "If you're Mason, prove it." Mason's expression did not change, but something flinched in his eyes. "You froze in Helmand the first time they shelled us. You didn't hit the dirt. You just stood there staring at the sky like your brain forgot what mortars were. I tackled you into a drainage ditch, and you broke my nose with your elbow." Daniel felt the air leave his chest. No one knew that story. He had never told it. Mason went on. "2 nights later you stitched me up in a goat shed by red flashlight and told me if I ever mentioned the nose again, you'd drug me and shave my head." Daniel heard himself whisper, "Mason." Ranger's ears twitched. Mason lowered the barrel of the shotgun by an inch. Not much. Just enough to say that somewhere under all the scar tissue and years, he was fighting his own disbelief too. Daniel stared at him. "How?" Mason's face hardened again. "Later." "No. Now. Now gets us killed." As if the house agreed, a floorboard groaned downstairs. All three of them went still. Ranger whipped toward the attic opening and barked once, urgent. Mason's head snapped to the sound. You came alone? Yes. Then someone followed you. Daniel's pulse kicked hard again. Who? Mason gave a bitter smile. The kind of men who don't like old witnesses, old letters, or veterans asking smart questions. Another sound came from below. A careful step. Then another. Someone was inside. Mason moved first. He crossed the attic in 2 silent strides and grabbed Daniel by the sleeve, dragging him away from the open sight line of the ladder. Daniel almost shoved him off on reflex, but Ranger was already moving with Mason, low to the floor, body angled toward the stairs. Listen to me, Mason hissed. Your father hid things in this attic because he thought height gave him control. It doesn't. It gives us one exit and no cover. If they come up those stairs, we get pinned. Daniel jerked his arm free. You don't get to show up from the dead and start giving orders. Mason leaned close enough that Daniel could smell rain and old antiseptic on him. And you don't get to be sentimental right now. We have maybe 30 seconds before whoever cut your power stops being quiet. Ranger gave a warning rumble toward the opening. Daniel looked from the dog to Mason and saw the same conclusion in both of them. Immediate threat. Questions later. Mason pointed with the shotgun toward the broken wall cavity. Tape recorder. Back panel. Pull it. Daniel crouched and reached into the cavity behind the studs. His fingers found a narrow latch hidden along the inside edge. He yanked. A larger section of wall shuddered loose and swung inward, revealing a cramped passage between the attic wall and the chimney chase. Cold air breathed out of it. There's a crawl space? Daniel whispered. Your father called it a service channel. Old houses like this have dead spaces. Ranger barked sharply, then backed from the attic opening instead of advancing. Daniel looked down. A flashlight beam slid across the hallway floor below. Not theirs. Someone was sweeping the downstairs ceiling, searching. Mason cursed under his breath. Inside. Now! Daniel hesitated. Every instinct hated the idea of crawling blind into a hidden passage with a dead man who was somehow alive. But the beam below swept the ceiling again, closer to the folding ladder this time, and choice collapsed into survival. He ducked into the narrow passage. Mason came after him, then eased the wall panel mostly shut. Ranger slipped in last, nails scraping wood, and squeezed beside Daniel. Darkness swallowed them until Mason thumbed on a penlight covered with red tape. The passage smelled of brick dust, mildew, and old smoke. Daniel turned toward Mason in the red glow. Start talking. Mason shook his head. Quiet. Below them, the attic stairs creaked. One step. Then another. Whoever was in the house had started climbing. Ranger pressed forward, ears rigid, nose high. Daniel could feel the dog vibrating with restrained force. Mason crouched by a narrow slit in the wood and peered through. Daniel leaned in beside him and looked out. From the hidden angle, he could see part of the attic floor and the opening at the top of the stairs. A man rose into view. Dark jacket. Gloves. Compact flashlight in one hand, pistol in the other. Not local police. Not some random thief. Too deliberate. The intruder kept low, moved his light once across the trunks, once across the photo on the floor, then killed the beam and listened. Daniel's stomach tightened. The man knew how to clear a room. Mason watched through the slit without breathing. Do you know him? Daniel studied the outline, the careful posture, the scar near the right ear when the man turned slightly. Then memory struck. Aaron Pike. Older now. Leaner. But Pike. The same intelligence officer whose tag had been hidden in the wall. The same man who signed the report. The same man who looked Daniel in the eyes years ago and said nothing could have been done. Daniel whispered, "Pike!" Mason's jaw tightened. "Good. Then I'm not hallucinating." Pike stepped farther into the attic and paused near the hidden floor compartment. He saw the open box immediately. Even in the low light, Daniel could read the shift in his body, the flash of anger, then calculation. Pike spoke into the darkness, his voice calm and low. "You should have burned the whole house, old man." Daniel frowned. Old man. His father. Before he could process that, Pike nudged the loose floorboard with his boot and found the beacon. The red pulse lit his face for half a second. "Damn," Pike muttered. "He really kept everything." Mason's fingers whitened on the shotgun. Daniel turned to him. "My father, what was he to you?" Mason kept his eyes on Pike. "A coward." Down in the attic, Pike moved to the wall cavity and saw it hanging open. His head came up slowly. He knew then that he was not alone. Ranger released a sound so low it was almost a vibration in the wood. Pike pivoted toward the hidden passage. The penlight painted Mason's scarred face red as he whispered, "When he fires, don't stay behind me. Go left. This passage drops to the pantry wall. If Ranger gets an opening, let him take it." Daniel stared at him. "You've done this before." Mason's gaze stayed fixed on the slit. "I've done little else for 9 years." Pike took 2 slow steps toward the panel, pistol raised. "Daniel," he called softly, like a negotiator. "I know you're up here. You don't understand what you found." Daniel felt heat flood his chest. Pike continued, "Your father made mistakes. So did I. But none of that changes what Mason became after the fire." Mason's voice dropped to a whisper rough with hatred. "Don't listen." Pike stopped just 3 feet from the hidden panel. "He wasn't rescued, Daniel. He was collected. The men who took him kept him alive because he was useful. You think he came back to tell you the truth? He came back because he needs what's buried under the orchard." Daniel's head turned sharply toward Mason. For the first time since appearing, Mason looked uncertain. But Daniel saw it. Pike smiled in the dark, sensing the fracture. "Ask him what's in the ground behind this house. Ask him why your dog kept staring at the attic stairs." Ranger suddenly snarled, not at Pike, at Mason. Mason whispered, "Daniel, don't." The panel exploded inward as Pike kicked it. The shot came at the same instant. The muzzle flash turned the crawl space white, and Ranger launched straight through it. The crawl space erupted in splinters, smoke, and noise. Daniel never heard himself shout. The gunshot inside that narrow hidden passage was so violent it seemed to punch the air out of his lungs and drive hot pressure through his skull. 1 second Pike's boot was coming through the panel, the next Ranger became a blur of muscle and teeth, launching through the white burst of the muzzle flash before Daniel's brain could process what was happening. Pike fired once. The round struck brick somewhere behind Daniel and screamed off in sparks. Then Ranger hit him. The impact slammed Pike sideways into the broken frame of the passage. His pistol arm jerked high. The flashlight spun away. Wood cracked. Men grunted. Ranger's bark came out like an explosion inside the cramped dark, all fury and training and absolute commitment. "Move!" Mason roared. Daniel moved. Not because he had decided to. Because years of drilled reflex ripped control away from shock. He dropped low, drove his shoulder past Mason, and lunged through the blown panel into the attic just as Pike and Ranger crashed hard against a stack of trunks. One trunk toppled and split open, spilling yellowed blankets and photographs across the floorboards. Pike fought like a trained man, not some burglar panicking under attack. His left arm came up to shield his throat. His right hand lost the pistol but reached instantly for Ranger's collar, trying to turn the dog's momentum. Ranger answered by clamping down harder on the jacket's sleeve and jerking sideways with brutal force. Pike yelled, more anger than pain. Daniel kicked Pike's dropped pistol across the attic and threw himself into the fight. He caught Pike's shoulder and drove him back, but Pike twisted fast, elbowed Daniel hard in the ribs, and nearly spun him off balance. The man was older, but the speed was still there. Training was still there. And underneath it Daniel felt something worse than skill. Preparation. Pike had come expecting violence. Mason came through the broken panel a heartbeat later, shotgun swinging up, scarred face rigid with cold focus. Off him! Daniel grabbed Ranger's harness and hauled back. The shepherd resisted for one savage second, lips peeled, throat rumbling so deep Daniel felt it in his forearm. Then Ranger gave ground and slid back to Daniel's side, body still coiled to launch again. Pike rolled, saw the shotgun pointed at him, and froze. For 3 suspended seconds nobody moved. Rain pounded the roof. Dust floated through the flashlight beam lying sideways on the floor. Daniel's breath tore in and out of him. Ranger growled. Mason kept the barrel of the shotgun aimed squarely at Pike's chest. Pike's eyes slid from Mason to Daniel, then to the open metal box near the floor compartment. When he spoke, his voice was calm again, maddeningly calm. You should have killed me when you had the chance. Mason's jaw tightened. I was trying to die. There's a difference. Daniel looked sharply at Mason, but Mason did not look back. Pike slowly raised his empty hands. If you shoot me, you still won't know where the rest of it is. The rest of what? Daniel snapped. Pike smiled faintly despite the blood on his lip. Ask your ghost. Mason stepped closer, muzzle never wavering. Don't call me that. Then tell him what you buried. Daniel turned between them. Enough. No more half-truths. Somebody tells me what the hell is going on right now. No one answered immediately. That silence was worse than the gunshot, because both men looked like they were choosing which lie would survive longest. Ranger suddenly stopped growling. Daniel felt it at once. The dog's body changed. Not relaxed. Reoriented. His ears turned toward the attic stairs. Nose lifted. Weight shifted. Another threat. Daniel followed his gaze. From below came the sound of the front door closing. Not slamming. Closing carefully. Then a new set of footsteps entered the house. Slow. Measured. Unhurried. Pike heard them too. Something flashed across his face. Fear, real and immediate. Mason saw it and gave a humorless laugh. You didn't come alone. Pike's calm cracked. I told them not to move until I confirmed. He stopped. Daniel caught that. Them? No answer. The footsteps downstairs moved through the hallway beneath the attic. One person? Two? Daniel could not tell. Oldwood made sound travel strangely. Ranger let out a sharp bark toward the opening, and this time even Mason glanced toward the ladder with visible tension. Pike said, We need to leave. Right now. Mason almost smiled. That's the first honest thing you've said in years. Daniel snatched the flashlight off the floor and aimed it at Pike's face. Who's downstairs? Pike squinted against the beam. Not law enforcement. Not friends. That narrows it down to most of the planet. They were never supposed to know you found the house this fast. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. What do you mean, found the house? I live here. Pike's expression shifted, and for the first time, he looked genuinely confused. What? Daniel stared at him. This is my father's place. Mason turned toward Daniel sharply. He didn't tell you. Tell me what? The footsteps below stopped directly beneath the attic. Then came the scrape of metal. A sound Daniel recognized instantly. Someone downstairs was chambering around. Ranger exploded into barking. Mason moved like the years between soldier and ghost had never happened. He yanked Daniel by the shoulder toward the far wall. Ladders dead. Passages blown. We go out the gable. Daniel jerked free. There's no outside access. There is if you know this house. Pike rose halfway from the floor. Mason swung the shotgun toward him. Try it. Pike lifted both hands again, breathing harder now. You leave me here, we all die separately. Mason looked like he might accept that. Daniel cut in. Why should I trust either of you? Pike answered first. Because the men downstairs aren't here for me. They're here for what your father took. Mason answered a beat later. And because if they get the map, they'll open the orchard. Daniel felt the words hit deeper than he expected. The orchard. Again. He looked at the property map lying near the letters. The red circle Daniel had seen earlier seemed brighter now under the flashlight, like a wound on paper. He's here. The message had haunted him since he found it, but now another question rose over it. What exactly was he? The footsteps below shifted. A voice drifted up from the hallway, low but clearly meant to be heard. Daniel. Daniel went cold. Not Mason's voice this time. His father's. Dead 3 years. Buried on the hill cemetery with Daniel standing at the grave numb and hollow, while rain soaked through his black coat. Yet there it was again. His father's voice, precise and hard. Daniel, if you're up there, don't let them take it outside. Pike went pale. Mason did not. That terrified Daniel more than anything yet. You hear that? Daniel whispered. Mason's answer came without hesitation. Yes. Pike shook his head once, almost to himself. No. No, he was supposed to be gone. Daniel snapped toward him. What does that mean? Pike's control finally broke. It means your father was never protecting you. He was guarding a door. The entire attic seemed to hold its breath. Ranger's barking cut off abruptly. He stood with his ears forward, staring not at the stairs now, but at the military footlocker near the chimney, the one Daniel had passed earlier without thinking. The dog took one step toward it, then another, whining low in his throat. Daniel saw something then. The floor beneath the footlocker was wet. Not rainwater. Darker. Seeping through the cracks between the boards in a slow, spreading line. Mason saw it too. His face changed. For the first time since reappearing, the hard mask slipped and something raw opened underneath it. Fear. Not for himself. For Daniel. Back away from that, Mason said. Ranger barked at the footlocker. The voice from below spoke again, his father's voice, distant and terrible. Danny, don't let the dog open it. Daniel had not heard that name from his father in years. Not since before the war. Not since before all the fractures and silences. Something moved inside the footlocker. A heavy thump. Then another. The lid jumped once against its latches. Pike made a strangled sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. He kept it fed. Daniel turned on him. What is in there? Pike looked at him with the face of a man who had carried one secret too long and watched it rot everything around him. When he spoke, the words came out thin and cracked. Not what? He said. Who? The footlocker slammed from the inside so hard one latch tore free. And from within, muffled by steel and wood and years, a woman's voice cried out. Daniel, run! Daniel did not think. The instant the woman's voice came from inside the footlocker, every instinct he had split in two. One half wanted to run exactly as she had warned. The other half, the older, harder half built in fire and blood and ruined doorways, locked onto the threat and moved toward it. Ranger got there first. The German shepherd launched across the attic and skidded to a stop in front of the footlocker, barking so violently the sound shook dust from the rafters. He did not attack the metal box. He circled it once, nose high, tail rigid, then planted himself between it and Daniel as if trying to block both danger and curiosity at the same time. Back! Mason snapped. The second latch on the footlocker trembled. Something hit the lid again from beneath, not with the flat force of an animal, but with desperate, human rhythm. 3 strikes. A pause. Then 2 more. Help. Daniel knew that pattern too. Trapped person signaling. Controlled. Deliberate. Someone under stress, who still had enough discipline left to make the sound mean something. Pike saw Daniel understand, and panic flashed across his face. "Don't touch it!" Daniel turned on him. "You said who? Who is she?" Pike swallowed. "If you open that, you break the seal." Mason's eyes went to Pike with naked hatred. "There is!" Daniel's pulse hammered. "What seal?" Ranger barked at the footlocker again, then looked sharply toward Daniel. Not wild, not confused. Urgent. The way he looked when Daniel was about to make a fatal mistake. And for the first time, since hearing the woman's voice, Daniel hesitated. The old house groaned around them. Rain battered the roof. The hidden passage behind the wall hung open like a wound. Somewhere below, the front door moved softly in the wind. And under all of it was something else now. A vibration so faint Daniel would have missed it if Ranger had not frozen and lifted his head. A humming. Low. Steady. Mechanical. Not coming from the walls. From beneath the floor. Pike heard it too. His eyes flicked to the footlocker and then away too quickly. Daniel crouched, keeping the pistol angled toward Pike while his other hand reached toward the steel lid. "Daniel," Mason said, voice rough. "Think. I am thinking." "No. You're reacting." The words hit because they were true. He was not opening the locker because it was smart. He was opening it because a trapped voice had reached straight through all his anger and confusion and found the medic still buried inside him. Ranger whined. Daniel touched the lid. The metal was warm. That made no sense. The attic had gone cold enough that every breath ghosted faintly in front of him, yet the footlocker felt almost body warm, as if whatever lay beneath it had its own heat. Mason took one step closer. "That isn't a box." Daniel looked up sharply. Mason held his gaze. "It's a cover." Pike cursed under his breath. Daniel's stomach tightened. "For what?" Mason's answer came low. "A shaft." The next thud from inside the footlocker was followed by a woman's voice again, weaker now, muffled by steel and distance. "Daniel, don't let him open the orchard." Daniel went still. Everything kept leading back there. Pike lunged. 1 second he was on his knees, the next he had snatched a splintered board from the shattered panel and driven it hard toward Mason's shotgun. The barrel jerked sideways. Mason fired on reflex. The blast blew through the attic wall instead of Pike, tearing out plaster and sending wood dust into the air. Ranger sprang. He hit Pike in the chest and drove him backward over a trunk. Daniel grabbed for the falling shotgun with his free hand, nearly lost the pistol, caught both, and crashed shoulder first into the floor near the footlocker. Pike twisted and nearly rolled free. "Ranger!" Daniel shouted. The dog adjusted instantly, released, then re-engaged higher, clamping on Pike's jacket collar and pitting him against the boards with a snarl so deep it sounded inhuman. Mason recovered, drew a sidearm from under his coat, and put it between Pike's eyes. "Move again." Pike froze. Daniel got to one knee, grabbed the shotgun, and pointed it at Pike as backup. One palm was bleeding where a splinter had gone in deep. He ignored it. Below them came a new sound. A soft metallic chirp. Then another. Daniel knew it instantly because it matched the distress beacon exactly. Beep. Pause. Beep. Except this signal was coming from downstairs. Ranger heard it too and lifted his head, though he kept Pike pinned. Daniel stared toward the attic opening. "There's another beacon." Mason's face darkened. "No. There's a repeater." "A what?" A mirror signal. Something made to answer the original. Pike closed his eyes briefly. He built failsafes into everything. Daniel swung back. My father? Pike did not answer, which was answer enough. The woman's voice came again from beneath the footlocker, thinner now. He's stalling you. Daniel stepped to the box and seized the remaining latch. Mason said, If you pull that without bracing the weight, it drops. Daniel looked at him. Mason nodded toward the steel case. Told you. Cover, not container. Together, an action so natural and impossible it almost broke Daniel, they moved. Mason holstered his pistol long enough to catch one side of the steel. Daniel took the other while still keeping the shotgun angled at Pike. Ranger stayed on Pike, growling, muscles trembling with effort. 1, 2, now, Mason said. They heaved. The footlocker did not open. It shifted. Steel screeched against hidden runners, sliding 3 inches sideways before locking on rust. Daniel felt a breath of warm air rise from the crack below. Not attic air. Not house air. Occupied air. He swallowed. Again. They shoved harder. This time the footlocker dragged across the floorboards with a sound like an old gate being torn open. Underneath, it was not a storage pit. It was a square shaft reinforced with timber and old brick, dropping straight down into darkness. A fixed iron ladder vanished along one side. And 20 feet below, in the weak light of a single yellow bulb, was a room. Daniel only saw fragments at first. A cot bolted to the wall. Shelves lined with jars and canned food. A table. Chains fixed into stone. A water drum. A radio set. A woman standing beneath the opening with one hand shielding her eyes from the sudden light. She looked up. Daniel forgot to breathe. She was in her 50s, maybe older, hair streaked white, and tied back carelessly, face gaunt from years of indoor living. But the shape of the mouth, the sharpness around the eyes, the line of the brow, something in Daniel's memory moved. Not a clear memory. A child memory. A face glimpsed in an old photograph before it vanished into a drawer and was never shown again. The woman saw recognition flicker across his face. Her own expression changed from fear to something far more dangerous. Grief. Daniel, she whispered. His mother had died when he was 8. That was the story. Car accident on wet roads. Closed casket. No viewing. No details. Daniel heard himself say, No! The woman below flinched. Pike made a desperate sound behind them. Don't listen to her. Mason wheeled toward him with murder in his eyes. You shut your mouth. Ranger snarled again and drove Pike flat to the boards. The woman below stepped directly under the opening. Her voice was shaking now, but with urgency. You don't have time. He brought them here. Aaron never comes first unless the others are close. Daniel looked from her to Pike and back again, unable to get his mind to accept what his eyes were telling it. Who are you? The pain that crossed her face was immediate and total. Then she answered. Your father called me Evelyn when he locked me down here. Before that, she stopped, swallowed, and forced the words out. Before that, I was your mother. Rain seemed to vanish. The attic, the house, the storm, everything narrowed to those words. Daniel's grip slipped on the shotgun. Some buried part of him wanted to laugh, or scream, or deny it so completely that reality itself would snap back into something survivable. Instead, he just stared down the shaft at the woman, who was either impossible or the answer to every fracture in his childhood. You told him she was dead? Daniel asked Pike, voice barely there. Pike's laugh was jagged. I told him what his father paid to make official. Daniel turned so fast the movement blurred. Paid? And that was when the lights under the floor went out. The yellow bulb below the shaft snapped black. The attic fell into storm gray and shadow again. From downstairs came the crash of the front door slamming fully open. Boots entered the house. Not one pair. Several. Then a man's voice rose from below, cold and professional. "Third floor access confirmed. Bring the orchard key." The house changed the moment those boots crossed the threshold below. Daniel felt it in the floor before he heard the men clearly. Wait. Discipline. More than one body moving with purpose through old rooms that had once held family dinners, winter fires, and the hollow quiet of grief. Now the farmhouse sounded like a structure under assault. Rangers barked toward through the attic. Not panic. Warning. Mason dropped flat beside the open shaft and hissed down into the dark. "Stay against the wall. No matter what happens, do not come up." Below them, the woman who claimed to be Daniel's mother vanished into the black as obediently as someone who had learned the price of hesitation. Daniel heard the scrape of chains, the rustle of blankets, then nothing. His mother. The words still wouldn't settle into reality. They kept sliding off his mind like rain off glass. Dead at 8. Buried by story, paperwork, silence. That was what he had lived with. What he had shaped himself around. A missing center. A wound turned permanent. And now there was a woman in a hidden underground room calling him by name with the voice of someone who had not stopped carrying him in memory. Pike saw the fracture in Daniel's face and tried to use it. "Listen to me," he said, breathless under Ranger's weight. "If those men get down that shaft, none of us leave here breathing." Daniel swung the shotgun toward him. "Then start telling the truth. There isn't time." Mason answered for him. "There was time 9 years ago." Below, a door slammed. Then another. The intruders were clearing the first floor. Ranger's ears snapped toward the attic opening. His growl deepened so hard it vibrated through the boards. Daniel moved to the top of the ladder opening and risked one fast glance downward. 3 men. Dark jackets. Compact rifles. Flashlights kept low. They moved like contractors or soldiers who had spent enough years doing this that fear had been replaced by routine. One man stayed near the front entry to cover the hall. Another checked angles toward the kitchen. The third, broader than the others, stood in the center of the downstairs hall and looked up toward the attic as if he already knew where Daniel was. Then that man spoke. "Mercer." Not a shout. Just a calm acknowledgement. Daniel's spine went rigid. He knew the voice, though not from war. From later. From hospital corridors, paperwork rooms, and one brief conversation at his father's funeral with a stranger who had introduced himself as an old family friend. Cole Harrow. At the time Daniel had noticed only the man's expensive coat, his dead eyes, and how quickly his father's old lawyer had gone pale when Harrow stepped near the grave. Daniel had dismissed it. Just another vulture circling a dead man's estate. Now Harrow was in the house with armed men. And he knew Daniel's name. Daniel dropped back from the opening. "Harrow's here." For the first time since reappearing, Mason looked genuinely shaken. "That means they know about the ledger." Pike shut his eyes, like a man hearing his own sentence read aloud. Daniel snapped toward them. "What ledger?" Pike spoke first, fast now, because the lie space had finally collapsed. "Your father kept records. Routes, payments, names, transfers. Who sold what, who disappeared, who got paid to bury it. He thought keeping proof meant control." Mason's scarred face hardened. "He kept it because he believed no one would kill the man holding every secret." Daniel's thoughts struck each other like sparks. "And the orchard?" Pike gave a bitter laugh. "Not money. Not weapons. Worse. People. Evidence that could talk." The words hit so hard Daniel nearly missed the next sound. Metal on wood. A hook catching the lower rung of the attic stairs. They were coming up. Mason moved instantly. He shoved the letters, map, photo, and dog tags into Daniel's hands. Take these. What are you doing? Buying you distance. No. Mason grabbed Daniel by the front of the jacket and pulled him nose to nose. In the low storm light, his ruined face looked less ghostly now and more exhausted, like a man kept alive by anger so long it had become bone. Listen carefully, Mason said. The shaft room below doesn't just hold her. There's a tunnel out through the root cellar line. Your father built it during Prohibition and expanded it later when he started hiding the wrong things. You take Ranger, you go down, you get her out, and you follow the tunnel east until it forks. Daniel stared at him. You come with us. Mason's eyes did not move. Not if they climb that ladder. Pike barked out a laugh that sounded half mad. You think Harrow came all this way for the attic? He came for Daniel. The ledger means leverage if the sun survives. Dead, it's just clean up. The ladder creaked. One rung. Then another. Ranger lunged toward the opening, but Daniel caught the harness. Mason bent, picked up Pike's dropped pistol, checked it in one smooth motion, and chambered around. You still shoot left when you're angry? Daniel swallowed. Sometimes. Then don't be angry. Be useful. It was such a Mason thing to say that Daniel almost broke right there. Instead, he knelt by the shaft and looked down into the dark. If she's really... Mason cut him off. She is. You know that? I know because I heard your father say her name while he thought I was dead. I know because I heard her crying down there while he drank upstairs and called it mercy. The ladder groaned again, closer now. A flashlight beam sliced across the attic floor. They had reached the top. Mason shoved Pike toward Daniel. Take him. What? He knows the tunnel locks. If he lies, let the dog decide how much arm he keeps. Ranger, as if he understood every word, bared his teeth at Pike. Pike went pale. I'm not going down there. Mason's voice turned flat. Then stay up here and meet Harrow. That did it. Pike moved. Daniel jammed the shotgun at Pike's spine and forced him to the shaft opening. Ranger backed toward them, still facing the attic stairs. The dog looked between Daniel and Mason once, confused by the split. Daniel felt it too, that tearing, impossible demand to choose between the man he had mourned and the mother he had already lost once. Then Harrow's men breached the attic. The first rifleman came over the lip low and fast. Mason fired before the man fully cleared the opening. The blast hurled him backward down the stairs in a tangle of limbs and weapon. The second man ducked and returned fire immediately. Bullets punched through trunks, shredded hanging cloth, and slammed sparks from brick. Ranger barked with savage fury. Daniel grabbed Pike and dropped into the shaft ladder just as Mason fired again. Go! Mason roared. Daniel descended blind for the first 6 rungs, one hand on the ladder, one dragging Pike when the man hesitated. Ranger didn't climb. He leapt, hitting the lower section with control and landing between Daniel and the room below in a spray of dust. The woman in the darkness gave a choked cry and stumbled back. Above them, the attic became thunder. Gunfire. Wood splitting. Mason shouting once, too short to make out. Then Harrow's voice rose through the chaos, cold as iron. Don't kill Kane! Daniel first. Daniel hit the bottom and turned. The underground room was smaller than it had looked from above. Brick walls sweated damp. Shelves of canned food lined one side. A narrow cot. A battered sink. 2 lamps, one dead, one flickering on backup power. And near the back wall, shackled by one ankle to a steel ring set in concrete, stood the woman who had called herself his mother. She looked at him like the sight hurt. There was no time for truth gently handled. Tunnel, Daniel said. She pointed at a section of shelves. Behind those. Pike staggered off the ladder, and Daniel slammed him against the wall. Open it. I need the key. Then find it. His mother stepped forward before fear could stop her. Even in the light, Daniel saw how thin her wrists were, how carefully she moved, how many years captivity had carved into posture and silence. But when she looked at Pike, there was no weakness in her eyes at all, only loathing. He keeps the release pin under the radio. Ranger suddenly turned toward the ladder and barked upward with a sound Daniel had never heard before, fear and rage together. A body fell past the opening. It hit the bottom of the shaft room so hard the breath burst out of it in a wet gasp. Mason. He landed on his side, rolled once, and came up on one knee with blood soaking the left sleeve of his coat. For one wild instant Daniel thought they still had a chance. Then Harrow appeared at the top of the shaft, looking down at them with a pistol in one hand and a smile that held no warmth at all. And behind him, in the attic, someone screamed Ranger's name in Daniel's own father's voice. Daniel's body went cold in a way bullets had never managed. At the top of the shaft, Harrow stood calm and centered, pistol angled down into the room as if this entire nightmare had already been measured, rehearsed, and priced. Behind him, somewhere in the wrecked attic, his father's voice rang out again. "Ranger! Down!" The command bounced through wood and brick with enough authority to make the dog flinch. Only for a fraction of a second. But Daniel saw it. Ranger's ears twitched. His head snapped toward the shaft opening. Confusion rippled through the shepherd's body, not obedience exactly, but memory. The sound had reached into some buried part of his training, some old association connected to this house, to its smells, to the man Daniel had buried 3 years ago. Mason heard it too. Blood soaked through the sleeve of his coat and dripped from his elbow to the floor, but his eyes stayed hard and clear. "That isn't a recording," he said. Harrow smiled down from above. "No, it isn't." Daniel felt the room tilt. His mother, Evelyn, impossible and alive, pressed herself against the brick wall, one hand at the chain on her ankle, the other over her mouth, as if stopping herself from saying a name she no longer trusted. Pike stayed half-crouched near the radio table, breathing hard, his face gray with the fear of a man who had finally learned he was disposable. The voice came again, closer now. "Danny." Daniel hadn't heard that name spoken like that since before the war, before the lies hardened around his life, before the closed casket and the missing pieces and the silences that never fit right. His hands tightened on the shotgun until the tendons in his wrists burned. Harrow's gaze moved from Daniel to Mason and back again. "I tried to keep this clean. But men like your father always overestimate how long dirt can stay on top of truth." "Shut up," Daniel said. Harrow did not. "He said you'd come here eventually. Said grief always circles back to the same place. He just didn't think the dog would force it this soon." Ranger barked savagely at the opening. Mason pushed himself up from one knee, wincing once as his wounded arm shifted, then leveled Pike's pistol toward Harrow. "You're wasting time because you're waiting for him." Harrow's smile widened by a fraction. "You always were the quick one, Kane. That's why Ezra wanted you dead." Daniel's head snapped toward Mason. Mason never looked away from Harrow. "Told you your father sold us. Didn't tell you he tried to collect twice." A boot appeared at the lip of the shaft. Then a hand. Then the silhouette of a second man leaning into view behind Harrow, older, heavier in the shoulders than Daniel remembered, his face still in shadow. Daniel stopped breathing. The man did not step fully into the light. He didn't need to. Daniel knew the shape of him, knew the set of the shoulders, knew the way one hand rested near the seam of his coat as if it had spent a lifetime hovering near knives, tools, guns, anything useful when control started slipping. His father, Ezra Voss. Alive. Every thought in Daniel's head shattered outward at once. Funeral rain. Cemetery dirt. The priest speaking over a coffin Daniel had not been allowed to open. Harrow standing 10 yards away with dead eyes. The lawyer refusing to meet Daniel's gaze when papers were signed. All of it came back wrong now. Every silence became structure. Every omission became architecture. Ezra stepped beside Harrow and looked down into the room. Older. Leaner. More ravaged than death had a right to permit. His hair had thinned to iron gray. The lines in his face were deeper, harsher. But he was alive, and his eyes were exactly as Daniel remembered them, cold enough to make affection feel like something earned instead of given. Ranger snarled and sprang for the ladder. "Ranger, stay!" Daniel shouted. The dog checked himself at the bottom rung, claws scraping stone. Ezra's eyes flicked to the dog, then to Daniel. "Still does what you say." "Good." Daniel's voice came out rough and low. "You were buried." Ezra gave a tired exhale. "A box was buried." His mother made a sound then, small, broken, furious. "You monster!" Ezra did not look at her. "You were safer hidden." She laughed once, and the sound was pure hatred. "In chains? Alive!" Mason took a step toward the ladder, pistol raised. "You sold your own son's unit. You buried his mother under your house. And you call that keeping people alive?" Ezra finally looked at him. There was no guilt there. Only irritation, like Mason was a problem that should have stayed solved. "I call it surviving the kind of world that devours honest men first." Daniel felt something dangerous settle inside him. Not shock now, not grief, but the hard click of betrayal finding its true shape. "Was any of it real?" Ezra's gaze returned to him. "Enough of it." Daniel almost laughed. The answer was so perfectly cruel that it stripped something clean in him. "You let me bury you. I let you stay out of it." "Out of what?" Harrow answered. "Out of the ledger. Out of the orchard. Out of the names powerful men paid to disappear." Pike found his voice at last. "You said the boy was never supposed to know." Ezra's eyes cut toward him. "And yet here we are." Pike shrank back as if the words had struck him. Daniel moved without thinking. He shoved the letters and map into Evelyn's hands, then turned the shotgun up toward the shaft. "Unchain her." Ezra's face hardened. "No, unchain her." Harrow lifted his pistol slightly. "Careful, Daniel." The room compressed again into angles, weapons, breath, choices. Mason edged left to get a cleaner shot up the shaft. Ranger paced beneath the ladder, looking from Daniel to Ezra and back again with frantic intelligence, as if trying to decide which human scent matched the years of lies in the wood above them. Then Evelyn said, very quietly, "Ranger knows." Everyone heard her. Ezra frowned. "What?" She looked straight at Daniel. "That's why he stared at the attic stairs. Not because of ghosts. Not because of Mason. Because the ventilation shaft runs from this room up behind the attic wall. I used to stand under it at night and tap the pipe, hoping someone would hear. Hoping anyone would hear." Daniel stared at her. She lifted the old distress beacon with shaking fingers. "Mason got this to me months ago through the tunnel. I've been pulsing it when I could." Ranger wasn't staring at an empty stairwell. He was listening to me. The truth struck Daniel with almost physical force. All those nights. All that rigid, impossible focus from the dog. Ranger had not been seeing madness in the house. He had been refusing to ignore a living person trapped beneath it. Ranger whined once and looked up at Daniel, as if asking why it had taken so long. Daniel's throat tightened. "Good boy," he whispered. Ezra's expression changed for the first time. Not guilt. Alarm. Because he understood what Daniel understood now. The dog had broken the house's silence, and once silence broke, everything hidden inside it started breathing. Harrow snapped. "Enough. Key first." Pike flinched. "I don't have it." Ezra's eyes moved slowly to him. You lost it? Pike's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I thought. Mason smiled without warmth. He hid it in the attic wall with the tags. Insurance. Daniel remembered the dog tags, the cavity, the tape recorder. His pulse kicked. He had not searched everything. Ezra realized it at the same moment. Where is it? He asked. No one answered. The silence sharpened. Then Harrow moved. Fast. He grabbed Ezra by the back of the coat, shoved him half aside, and drove his pistol down toward Evelyn instead of Daniel. Drop the beacon, Harrow said, or she dies before you hear another truth. Daniel raised the shotgun. Mason raised the pistol. Ranger crouched to spring. And Ezra, shoved just enough to lose balance, caught himself on the shaft edge and looked down at Harrow with naked disbelief. That was the final fracture. Not Harrow working for Ezra. Ezra working with Harrow only until Harrow no longer needed him. Harrow smiled thinly, eyes still on Evelyn. Didn't tell you that part, did he, Daniel? The ledger isn't the real prize. Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger. Then what is? Harrow's gaze lifted to him, bright with triumph. The orchard isn't a graveyard, he said. It's a vault. For one suspended second, nobody moved. Then, from somewhere behind the false shelf, deep in the tunnel wall no one had touched yet, a child began to cry. Not one cry. More than one. The sound came thin and terrified through the stone, as if an entire hidden chamber had just remembered it was not empty. Daniel's hand tightened on the shotgun until the wood bit into his palm. At the top of the shaft, Harrow stood in the broken square of light like a man who had already counted every breath left in the room and decided which ones mattered. The pistol at his hand pointed down with lazy confidence, but his eyes kept moving. Daniel, Mason, Evelyn, Pike, Ranger, the open shelf, the hidden passage. He was not the kind of man who feared chaos. He was the kind who used it. Then the voice came again from the attic above him. Ranger! Down! The dog flinched. Barely. Just a twitch through the shoulders and ears. But Daniel saw it. Ranger's growl broke for half a second, then came back deeper, torn between instinct and recognition. That voice had not sounded like a recording. It sounded like command memory dragged up from years ago, from this house, from nights Daniel was not here to see what was happening above the ceiling and below the floor. Mason heard it too. Blood kept running down his left sleeve, but the pain seemed far away now. His focus stayed locked on Harrow and the dark shape behind him. That's him, he said. Daniel didn't ask who. The shape moved into view behind Harrow. Ezra Voss stepped to the edge of the shaft and looked down at them. For one airless second, Daniel's mind stopped working. His father had been buried 3 years ago. Daniel had stood over a grave in cold rain, while a pastor spoke over a coffin he had not been allowed to open. He had signed papers, closed the house, left with a silence that felt final because grief had to be final, or it would never end. But Ezra Voss was standing there alive. Older, leaner, deeper lines around the mouth, the same hard eyes, the same healed limp showing for one step as he settled at the shaft edge. Daniel's breath came out as a whisper. Dad? Ezra's face did not soften. That hurt more than the lie. Daniel, he said, as if they had not crossed death to stand here again. Put the gun down. Evelyn made a broken sound from the wall. Not surprise. Hatred. Don't you dare speak to him like you're still his father. Ezra did not look at her. I fed you. I kept you alive. She laughed once, and there was no sanity in it, only years of chained rage. You buried me breathing. The room held still around that sentence. Daniel's eyes moved from Ezra to Evelyn and back again. The woman calling herself his mother. The man he'd buried standing over her prison. Ranger refusing to stop listening. Mason alive. Pike cornered. Harrow smiling as if truth were only another weapon. Mason rose another inch despite the blood loss, and leveled the pistol up the shaft. "You sold us," he said to Ezra. "Then you let your son grieve the bodies you manufactured." Ezra's gaze dropped to him. "I let my son survive. You let Carter burn." Daniel's head snapped toward Mason. Carter. The deepest wound. Mason had touched it now. Ezra answered like he was discussing weather. "Carter was collateral. You were supposed to be." Daniel felt the floor move under him. Pike shut his eyes. There it was. Confirmation. Daniel's voice came back rough. "What are you saying?" Harrow answered before anyone else could. "I'm saying your father agreed to one elimination and got two complications instead." Ranger barked once, violently. Daniel swung the shotgun up toward the shaft. "You talk again, and I shoot you first." Harrow smiled. "No, you won't. Because you still think this ends with one clean answer." Ezra finally looked at Daniel again, and something like urgency entered his face. Not love. Not remorse. Calculation under pressure. "Listen to me. Everything down here is about control. If Harrow takes the ledger, he owns every name in it. If Mason gets out with her, he burns everything. And if you keep standing in the middle like a grieving son instead of a thinking man, everyone dies, and the orchard opens." "The orchard," Daniel said. The word had followed him through letters, maps, warnings, and lies until it no longer sounded like a place. "What is in the orchard?" No one answered right away. Above, rain battered the roof. Somewhere in the attic, one of Harrow's men groaned weakly where Mason's shotgun blast had thrown him back. The farmhouse seemed to breathe in shallow, frightened intervals. Evelyn spoke first. "Not what?" Her eyes were on Daniel now. "Who?" The word landed like ice. Daniel looked at her ankle chain, the cot, the canned food, the old radio, the years hidden inside this room. Then he looked back up at Ezra and saw with sudden clarity that his father had never been protecting property. He had been protecting access. Mason must have seen the realization in Daniel's face because he said, "The orchard isn't a graveyard. It's a holding site." Pike finally broke. "Stop." No one listened. Mason kept talking, each sentence harder than the last. "Children move through here. Witnesses. Leverage. People no one could let surface. Some were sold. Some were traded. Some were buried under new names." Daniel's stomach clenched so hard pain shot up under his ribs. "That's a lie," Ezra said, but there was no force in it. Evelyn looked at Daniel with tears standing in her eyes. "I heard them. Through the vents. At night. I heard children crying under the orchard for years." Ranger's growl changed. Not at Ezra. Not at Harrow. At Daniel's father's hands. Daniel followed the dog's line of sight and saw Ezra clutching something partly hidden inside his coat. A key. Long iron shaft. Brass head. Not a house key. Not a padlock key. A vault key. Harrow saw Daniel see it and moved instantly. He shoved Ezra hard into the shaft wall and jammed the muzzle of his pistol against the older man's neck. The room below erupted, Ranger barking, Evelyn screaming, Pike stumbling back, Mason dragging his wounded arm up to fire. "Don't," Harrow said. Everything stopped because the way he said it made clear he meant it. His smile was gone now. Whatever civility he had worn fell away, leaving something stripped and ruthless. "This is the part where old loyalties die." Ezra's face twisted, not with fear but disgust. "You need me." Harrow pressed harder. "Needed you." Past tense. Daniel stared. The whole architecture shifted again in his head. His father was not at the top of this. He had never been at the top. He had been a keeper, a broker, a man who believed holding doors made him master of what passed through them. Harrow was something else. Bigger, colder. The kind of man who let others build a crime and then arrived to inherit it. Mason saw it too. You were never after the ledger. Harrow's eyes flicked toward him. The ledger is insurance. The orchard is legacy. Daniel's mouth went dry. Legacy of what? Harrow looked down at him almost kindly. Of a network built on children no one would miss. The words hit Evelyn like a bullet. She folded against the wall, one hand over her mouth, the other digging at the chain around her ankle until the skin beneath it reddened. Pike whispered, Jesus Christ! Like prayer had arrived too late to matter. Daniel felt the old combat calm try to rise in him and fail. This was worse than gunfire. War had enemies. This had fathers, homes, funerals, kitchens, fields, lies told at a child's bedside and signed into county records. His father had been part of this. Maybe not the architect. Maybe not the worst. But deep enough that innocence was impossible now. Ezra closed his eyes once, then opened them on Daniel. I kept you out of it. Daniel almost laughed. You built my life out of it. That landed. For the first time, Ezra looked old. Your mother found out too much. Evelyn lifted her head. I found out what you were. No, Ezra said. You found out what I was trying to stop. Mason spat blood onto the concrete. There is! Traffic people, cage your wife, bury yourself alive, then call it a sacrifice. Ranger barked again at the key in Ezra's hand. Daniel saw the pattern one beat before the others did. The dog wasn't warning about Ezra. He was warning about the key. Because the brass head was wet. Not with rain. Dark wetness. Fresh. Daniel's gaze shot to Harrow's sleeve. Then to the ladder above. Then to the attic floor no one could see from here. Someone else had been carrying that key before Ezra took it. Someone hurt. Someone near the orchard. Who did you take it from? Daniel asked. No one answered. Then from somewhere above the shaft, from the attic beyond Harrow and Ezra, a weak child's voice drifted down through the house. Not crying. Speaking. Mom? Every person in the room stopped breathing. Evelyn made a sound Daniel never wanted to hear again, a mother recognizing hope and terror in the same second. Harrow's head turned slightly toward the attic behind him. And Daniel understood, all at once, what the real reveal was. The orchard had never been empty. It was still in use. Daniel did not realize he had moved until the shotgun was already at his shoulder. That single word from above, Mom, tore through the room more violently than gunfire. It was a child's voice, thin with fear. Evelyn went white beneath the grime and years. Her hand flew to her mouth, but the sound that escaped her was not a sob. It was recognition. Harrow turned his head toward the attic behind him. Only enough. Mason fired. The shot tore up the shaft like thunder. Harrow twisted on reflex, the round ripping brick beside his shoulder instead of taking him through the throat. Ezra lurched sideways. The iron key flew from his hand, struck the shaft wall, and spun out into the dark. Daniel heard it hit wood above with a metallic crack, then slide somewhere across the attic floor. Ranger launched. He hit the ladder so hard the whole shaft shook. In one blur of claws and barking fury, the shepherd vaulted upward toward Harrow's men. Harrow fired down instinctively. The muzzle flash turned the shaft white. A round blasted brick above Daniel's head and showered everyone below with stone dust. Ranger! Daniel shouted. Too late. The dog vanished over the lip into the attic, and chaos exploded above them. Men yelled. Furniture crashed. One rifle fired in a short burst. Mason moved at once, grabbing Daniel by the shoulder and shoving him hard toward the back wall. Get her chain off! Daniel dropped beside Evelyn. Her face was rigid with terror, but her eyes were locked on the shaft opening above, listening for the child's voice again. Where's the key for this? Daniel demanded. She swallowed once. There isn't one. He changed it after Mason found the tunnel. Release lever under the cot frame. Left side. Pike bolted. 1 second, he was crouched beside the radio. The next he lunged for the shelf at the back of the room, clawing behind jars and old supply tins. Mason swung the pistol toward him. Stop! Pike didn't. He pulled something metal from behind the shelf, a small black transmitter with a cracked antenna. Daniel saw Harrow's face appear at the shaft opening again at the same moment Pike thumbed the switch. No! Mason roared. The transmitter chirped once. Then the earth under the farmhouse moved. A deep mechanical thud rolled under the floor, like some giant hidden lock had just turned. Dust fell from the ceiling. The jars on the shelves rattled. From somewhere far off came the groan of heavy metal dragging across stone. The orchard, Daniel thought. Something was opening under the orchard. Mason fired. The shot caught Pike high in the shoulder and spun him sideways into the wall. The transmitter flew from his hand and smashed under the table, still blinking weakly. Pike screamed and collapsed, clutching the wound. You stupid bastard, Mason snarled. You just woke the whole system. Above them, Harrow smiled down through the shaft, blood on his cheek. Too late. Then he disappeared from view. Daniel tore the cot aside and found the lever welded under the frame exactly where Evelyn said it would be. He pulled once. It jammed. He pulled harder. Russ screamed. The iron shackle at Evelyn's ankle snapped open with a violent click. For a second she didn't move. Then another child cried somewhere above and beyond the wall, and she came alive. Tunnel, she said, already moving toward the shelves. Not the East Fork. He'll expect that. There's a drainage split under the root cellar. Low passage. Floods and rain, but it comes out behind the old corn silos. Daniel grabbed her elbow. You heard children. How many? Her eyes flinched. Enough. That answer hit harder than a number. Mason kicked Pike's transmitter across the room and crushed it under his heel. Daniel, choose now. There it was. Choose one thing. Lose the others. Protect the mother he had just found or go after the child who called into the attic. Ranger answered for him. A scream burst from the attic above, not canine, human. Then Ranger barked twice, sharp and commanding, the exact pattern he used when he had located a living victim. Daniel's head snapped up. He's got the kid, Evelyn whispered. Mason's face changed. They moved one before coming in. Insurance if the orchard failed. Daniel looked from the shaft to the shelves hiding the tunnel. Then to Evelyn. Then to Pike writhing on the floor. Then to Mason, bleeding steadily but still standing. Everything inside him split again. Take her through the tunnel, Mason said. Daniel stared. What? I'll go up. You're hit. I've fought worse. Daniel. Mason's voice cracked like a slap. He brought that child into your house to control you. Stop letting him. Above them came the sound of someone running across the attic. Then a crash. Then Harrow's voice, farther off now, barking orders Daniel couldn't fully make out. Ranger barked again. Moving. Chasing. Daniel made the decision so fast it felt like jumping from a cliff. He shoved the shotgun into Mason's good hand, grabbed Pike by the collar with his free hand, and hauled him half upright. You're taking us to the tunnel split. Pike stared at him through pain. You think I'm helping you? Daniel drove him face first into the brick. I think you like breathing. Evelyn was already stripping blankets off the back shelf, revealing a narrow iron hatch set low in the wall behind old crates. Water stains ringed the frame. Mud clung dry and ancient along the bottom edge. Mason moved to the base of the ladder. Blood dripped from his fingers. Daniel stepped close. "You come back." Mason gave a crooked smile. "Now you sound like before." Before. The word almost broke him. Ranger's bark tore down the shaft again, closer this time, followed by a child's cry cut off abruptly, as if a hand had clamped over a mouth. Mason climbed, fast despite the wound. He vanished over the lip into the shattered attic, and almost immediately a gunshot cracked above. Evelyn flinched. Daniel shoved Pike toward the hatch. "Open it." Pike laughed weakly. "You have no idea what's down there." Daniel crouched until they were face to face. "Then educate me." Pike looked at Evelyn, and something like shame crawled into his expression. "There are rooms," he whispered. "Holding rooms. Transfer rooms. A medical bay that isn't medical. They keep records in the central vault and children in the side chambers until transport." Evelyn closed her eyes. Daniel felt heat rush up his neck. "How many children?" Pike hesitated. Daniel pulled the pistol from his belt and pressed it to Pike's wound. Pike screamed. 6. Maybe 7. I don't know who Harrow moved tonight." The house above them thundered with another impact. Something heavy hit the attic floor. Ranger barked in savage bursts, then yelped once, brief, sharp, unbearable. Daniel went cold. Evelyn grabbed his arm. "If you go up now, Harrow gets the tunnel. If you go down now, the child above may die." He looked at her. She looked like a mother who had spent years learning impossible choices. "You can't save this house," she said. "Choose who leaves it." That was when smoke began curling down the shaft. Then at first, gray, then thicker. Harrow was setting the attic on fire. Daniel smelled accelerant in it before he fully saw it. Plan burn. Ledger gone. Tunnel sealed. Survivor smoked out. Pike smelled it too and started shaking. "He'll burn the intake vents. If he does that, the lower chambers fill first." Evelyn spun to the hatch. "Open it." Pike fumbled at the wheel lock with his good hand. It slipped once in blood, then caught. The iron hatch gave with a sucking pop, and a gust of colder, wetter air breathed out from the tunnel beyond. Stale water. Mud. Rust. And underneath it something worse. Disinfectant. Children. Daniel pushed Evelyn toward the opening. "Go!" She stopped dead. "Not without the child above." Another burst of smoke rolled down the shaft. This time it carried sparks. From above came Harrow's voice, half drowned by flame and struggle. "Shoot the dog!" Ranger answered with a roar Daniel had only heard once before, overseas, in the dark, when he had dragged Daniel bleeding away from a doorway rigged to explode. Daniel made his choice. He looked at Evelyn. "Take Pike and go to the split. Don't stop. If Mason comes down, bring him. If I'm not there in 5 minutes, keep moving." She stared at him like she wanted to argue, but whatever she saw in his face ended it. She nodded once, grabbed Pike by the collar, and dragged him toward the tunnel mouth. Daniel turned back to the shaft. Smoke poured down now in black layers. The ladder was becoming a chimney. Above it, hidden by firelight and ruin, his dog was fighting. A child was trapped. Harrow was still in the house. Daniel holstered the pistol, grabbed the side rails, and started climbing straight into the smoke. Halfway up, he heard Mason scream his name. Then the burning attic floor gave way under his hands. Daniel dropped through flame. For one blind instant, the world vanished into heat, sparks, and splintering wood. The burning attic floor broke under his hands, and his body slammed through the collapsing edge of the shaft opening. He hit shattered boards and half-burned insulation hard enough to drive the breath out of him. Fire flashed across the rafters. Smoke rolled low and thick. He heard Ranger before he could see him. Two savage barks. A man screaming. Then Mason shouting somewhere to Daniel's right. Daniel rolled, coughing, eyes burning. The attic had become a furnace. Flames climbed one wall near the chimney. Through the smoke, he saw a child-sized shape curl behind an overturned trunk near the far slope of the roof. Beside that trunk, Ranger was latched onto one of Harrow's men, dragging the man backward by the forearm every time he tried to raise his rifle. The weapon fired once into the ceiling. Mason was on one knee near the broken wall cavity, pistol in his good hand, blood dark down his left side. He fired through the smoke at a second silhouette moving for the attic stairs. The figure fell, hit the ladder, and crashed halfway down with a scream. "Kid!" Mason shouted when he saw Daniel move. "Forget me!" Daniel forced himself up. The child behind the trunk was small. A girl, maybe 7, with dark hair matted with soot. Her wrists were zip-tied in front of her. A strip of duct tape hung loose from one side of her mouth, where she had torn it half away. Her eyes found Daniel through the smoke with the terror of someone who had stopped expecting rescue. "It's okay," Daniel rasped. "I've got you." He dropped beside her and ripped the tape free. The girl sucked in air and choked on it. "My brother!" she cried. "He took my brother!" Daniel's head snapped up. Harrow. Not just one child. More than one. Daniel turned and saw Harrow near the far gable window, half hidden by smoke, dragging another child by the back of the jacket toward a narrow exterior hatch Daniel had never known existed. The second child, a boy, maybe 9, was fighting hard but badly, terrified and exhausted. Harrow used him like a shield. Mason saw it too and tried to rise, but his wounded arm failed him. "Daniel, don't let him!" A beam overhead gave way and slammed down between them. The attic split into two worlds. On Daniel's side, fire, the rescue girl, Ranger, smoke, and the open shaft down to the tunnel where Evelyn waited. On Harrow's side, the boy, the hatch, and a path out onto the roof. Harrow smiled across the flames. "Every time," he called. "Every time they make you choose one life over another." Daniel felt the word stab deep because Harrow had read him right. Carter. Mason. Evelyn. The children. The whole house had been a machine built to turn choice into guilt. Not this time. Daniel scooped the girl into his arms and ran toward the shaft. Ranger saw him move and released the rifleman instantly, snapping to Daniel's side. The wounded man screamed and clawed at his ruined arm, rifle spinning away into the fire. Daniel reached the shaft and nearly slipped on blood and ash. Smoke was pouring down into it now, but the ladder remained intact. He dropped to one knee, set the girl down at the opening, and shouted into the darkness below. "Evelyn!" Her voice came back at once. "Daniel? Catch her!" He cut the zip ties with Mason's knife, then lowered the girl onto the ladder. Small hands. Shaking fingers. She stared at the dark hole below her like it was another trap. Ranger barked once at her shoulder. The girl obeyed. She started down. Only then did Daniel turn back. Mason was trying to crawl toward the fallen beam, still aiming his pistol through the fire toward Harrow's side of the attic. Harrow had reached the hatch now. He kicked it open with one hard blow. Rain and wind punched into the room, whipping smoke sideways. Lighting flashed outside and framed Harrow in blue-white light, one hand on the hatch, the other clamped in the boy's collar. Daniel grabbed the shotgun from where it had fallen and ran toward Mason. A bullet tore past his ear and buried itself in the trunk behind him. The rifleman Ranger had mauled wasn't done. He had dragged himself upright against the wall and recovered a sidearm from his ankle. His ruined arm hung useless, but his good hand was steady enough. He fired again. The shot struck the boards at Daniel's feet. Ranger launched before Daniel could turn. The dog crossed the attic like a thrown weapon. He hit the man in the chest, drove him backward through a patch of weakened floor, and both of them vanished in sparks and rotten boards. The crash below was followed by one short human scream, then silence. Daniel's heart lurched. "Ranger!" No answer. Only fire. Only rain hissing through the open hatch. Only Harrow dragging the boy onto the roof. Mason shoved the pistol toward Daniel. "Go!" Daniel took it and ran for the fallen beam. It burned along one edge. Going around meant too slow. He holstered the shotgun, planted one boot on the beam, and vaulted. Heat bit through his jeans. Pain knifed up his leg. He landed badly, stumbled, caught himself on a burning rafter. Then he was through. The hatch banged in the wind. Beyond it lay slick shingles, pouring rain, and a roofline dropping toward the orchard side of the property. Harrow was halfway to the ridge now, hauling the boy with one hand while keeping his pistol pressed against the child's ribs with the other. Lightning tore across the sky. For a heartbeat, Daniel saw the whole property in hard white detail. The orchard beyond the house. The old rows of trees bending in the storm. And there, between the trunks, several rectangular openings in the earth where hidden doors had been forced wide from below. The orchard was open. Vehicles waited beyond the tree line with their lights off. Figures moved between the rows. And children, small moving shapes, were being rushed toward the dark. Daniel almost stopped breathing. The whole network was evacuating. Harrow saw him take it in and laughed into the rain. "Now you understand." Daniel stepped onto the roof. Each shingle was slick as ice. Wind shoved hard from the west. Smoke poured around him from the attic hatch. "Let him go," Daniel said. Harrow tightened his grip on the boy. "Which one?" The cruelty of it hit. Daniel kept moving. One step. Then another. Low center of gravity. "Don't look down." The boy was crying now, not loudly, just the contained crying of a child who has learned noise makes things worse. Below, the orchard moved with hidden life. Doors in the ground. Armed men. Transfer vans. Daniel raised the pistol. "I said let him go." Harrow shook his head. "You still think this is a rescue? It isn't. It's an inheritance. Your father kept the system local. Small. Weak. I can scale it." Daniel wanted to kill him right there. Harrow saw that too. "That's why you'll lose. Men like you need innocence to protect. Men like me only need openings." He shoved the boy toward the roof edge. Not off. Just enough. The child slipped, screamed, and clawed wildly at the rain-slick shingles. Daniel lunged on instinct. That was what Harrow wanted. He fired. The shot hit Daniel low in the side and spun him half around. Pain arrived a split second later. Daniel dropped to one knee, pistol skidding from his hand. Rain hammered the wound immediately. Harrow moved fast to finish it. Then something exploded out of the smoke behind Daniel. Ranger. Black with soot, limping, one ear bleeding, but alive and all forward momentum. He hit Harrow high across the shoulders just as the man reached for Daniel. The impact ripped the boy free and sent Harrow crashing sideways onto the shingles. Pistol gone. Child rolling. Dog snarling. Daniel grabbed the boy by the jacket and hauled him back from the edge. Harrow fought under Ranger like a man trying to survive a wolf attack barehanded. He drove an elbow into the dog's ribs, clawed for the throat, found fur instead of skin. Ranger answered by locking onto Harrow's wrist and wrenching hard enough to make bone crack. Harrow screamed. Below them, headlights snapped on in the orchard all at once. Engine started. Men shouted. The evacuation had become a rout. Daniel pushed the boy toward the hatch. "Go inside! Find Mason!" The child hesitated only long enough to look at Ranger with huge terrified eyes, then crawled toward the opening. Daniel rose, one hand clamped to his bleeding side. Harrow was losing. For the first time, panic entered his face. He looked past Daniel, past the burning attic, toward the orchard and the vehicles starting to turn. Then he smiled. That terrified Daniel more than the gun had. Because a beaten man should not smile. Harrow slammed his free hand against something clipped inside his jacket. A dead man's switch. And somewhere under the orchard, deep in the open ground, red lights began blinking in perfect rows. For one terrible second, Daniel did not understand what he was seeing. Then the orchard answered Harrow's hand. Across the rain-lashed rows, red indicator lights came alive in straight lines where the hidden doors had opened from below. They were linked, armed, sequenced. Daniel saw men in the orchard throw themselves backward from the openings. Even Harrow's own people knew what those lights meant. Charges inside the chambers where children had been hidden, so no one would ever find the truth alive. Daniel's blood turned colder than the rain. "No!"